In the early 2000s, a threat to Israel arose. Information started seeping through to Israeli intelligence that a hostile nation was trying to build the ultimate weapon, a nuclear bomb. That weapon, if completion was allowed, threatened to destroy Israel. And worst of all, it was to be built in Syria, a country with which Israel had long-standing militaristic and ideological differences. This was a threat, one that represented a clear danger not just to the Israeli people, but to the very nation they had worked so hard to build. There was only one recourse: complete annihilation of the threat. That's what Israel achieved in 2007 with Operation Orchard, also known as Operation Outside the Box, as it conducted a daring strike on a suspected Syrian nuclear site. And in one fell swoop, Israel shattered Syria's ambitions of becoming a nuclear-enabled nation with an explosive raid the likes of which the country had never seen before. So what happened? To answer that question, we start at the beginning, with the first signs that Israel could have faced nuclear annihilation by a Syria led by the despotic Bashar al-Assad. Assad's ascendancy to the role of Syria's president in 2000 marks the start of the story. Now having to contend with a new dictator who threatened to be even worse than his father, Israel started keeping tabs on Syria's young leader. It watched as Assad started brutal crackdowns in his country, actions that would eventually spark a civil war in Syria. But it wasn't the crackdowns that worried Israel. It was the information its intelligence agency Mossad was gathering. In 2001, Mossad noticed that Assad had started to receive visits from North Korea. At the time, led by Kim Jong-il, North Korea's own dictator had already made it the country's mission to gain nuclear capabilities. To Israel, these visits could only mean one thing: Syria hoped to do the same thing. And in Syria's case, there could only be one reason for it to go nuclear: wiping Israel off the map. Israel wasn't ready to act just yet. Mossad and the Israeli Defense Forces, or IDF, needed to gather intelligence. In 2004, Mossad started to receive more information, all unverified at the time, that Syria was welcoming other foreign experts into the country to help it develop a nuclear program. The Times of Israel says that the scanned cover of a Mossad document from the time shows that Israel believed these experts were coming from North Korea, as suspected in 2001, Pakistan, and a third unknown country. At around the same time that Mossad was tracking these North Korean visits to Syria, United States intelligence was also tracing communications between the two countries, pinning the meetings down to a desert location named Al-Kibar. Israel's Unit 8200, which is its signals intelligence and code-breaking team, added that location to a growing watch list. Evidence kept building. In January 2006, Mossad received what it claimed to be the first substantial evidence that Assad was building some sort of nuclear reactor in the country. Another of Israel's military intelligence teams, Unit 9900, also started delivering satellite photos that showed a number of suspicious buildings were starting to crop up in northern Deir al-Zor, which is the name the IDF gave to the Al-Kibar site to which the US had alerted them. Dubbed Rubik's Cube, the site came under even closer Mossad surveillance. By November 2006, Mossad started to feel very confident that the Rubik's Cube was indeed a dangerous site, writing that the assumption that there is indeed a Syrian nuclear project is being strengthened in a memo. Then came the big break. A month after writing that memo, a top Syrian official arrived in London under a false name. That official was believed to be Ibrahim Otman, Syria's Atomic Energy Commission leader at the time. Mossad tracked the official's booking to a hotel and dispatched a team of at least 10 undercover agents to London. Dividing into 3 groups, those agents split their attention. One team stationed itself at Heathrow Airport, hoping to identify the official as he left his plane. The second team booked into the same hotel at which the official planned to stay, ideally with knowledge of what he looked like gained from the Heathrow team. The third would sit back and monitor the official, tracking any moves he made and visitors he received. It didn't take long for this complicated surveillance process to pay off. On the official's first day in London, he did what so many tourists do in England's capital. He went to see the sights and do a little shopping. The second Mossad team stationed at the hotel took the opportunity. After breaking into the official's hotel room, they found his laptop and installed a piece of software that would allow them to monitor any activities conducted on the computer. Back in Israel, Mossad finally had the goldmine of information it needed to confirm its suspicions. Hundreds of photographs of the Rubik's Cube facility in varying stages of construction started pouring in, allowing Mossad to conduct analysis to confirm whether the site was in fact designed to manufacture or store nuclear weapons. Mossad found blueprints and pictures of Otman meeting with a North Korean nuclear official named Chon Chibu. Recognizing the value of this new source, Mossad chose not to follow through on its original plan to assassinate Otman in London. That meant more images streaming in from the oblivious official's laptop, leading to another break in March 2007. Photographs from inside the Rubik's Cube. North Korean officials were again spotted in the photos, but the most important information came from the shots showing that Syria was in the process of building a plutonium reactor. A scan from a research division document released several years after the operation shows that Mossad believed it had all the information it needed. Syria is building in its territory a nuclear reactor for the production of plutonium with North Korea, which according to rigorous assessment is liable to be operational in about a year, read the document. To our assessment, it is clandestine and meant to achieve a nuclear weapon. Beyond all of this intelligence gained from Othman's laptop, there were other signs that Mossad was right in its assessment. In July 2007, a massive explosion rocked the Rubik's Cube facility, the result of Syria trying to weaponize a Scud missile with mustard gas. The Syrian state news agency Sana reported that the explosion killed 15 Syrian military personnel and injured a further 50. The mustard gas claim came from the Israeli magazine Jane's Defense Weekly. The United States was also informed of Israel's suspicions around this time. Former President George W. Bush responded by instructing the CIA to carry out its own surveillance to confirm whether Syria was building a nuclear reactor. Speaking to The New Yorker several years after Operation Orchard took place, one former US official says the CIA confirmed Israel's suspicions. "If it's not a nuclear reactor, then it's a fake nuclear reactor," he said. More evidence came from Israeli infiltrations and raids. Mossad snuck operatives into the facility to surveil it, setting the stage for a Sayeret Matkal commando raid. This wasn't a raid in the traditional sense. The commandos didn't storm the Rubik's Cube by force, killing any in their way to secure the evidence they needed. Instead, a team of 12 commandos were ferried to the site using helicopters, with the goal of taking photographs and collecting soil samples. It's believed the commandos were all dressed in Syrian uniforms, affording them just enough time to gather the soil samples they needed, but it almost ended in disaster. Syrian soldiers spotted the Israeli commandos, forcing them to abort their mission earlier than intended. Still, they had their soil, and with it came an analysis confirming the presence of nuclear materials at the Rubik's Cube. This was no fake nuclear site. Syria was building a nuclear reactor, and with it came the threat to Israel's very existence. The US wasn't convinced. The International Fellowship of Christians and Jews says America chose not to bomb Syria's budding nuclear facility due to concerns of sparking a war. But then Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert had no such qualms. Referring to Israel's Begin Doctrine, Olmert pointed out that Israel would not allow any regional enemy that intends to destroy Israel to obtain weapons of mass destruction. Syria fell into the category of a regional enemy, and with all the evidence Mossad had gathered, there was a risk that the Rubik's Cube would become the site of the very weapons of mass destruction that Israel feared so much. Something had to be done about the Rubik's Cube. Bush's plans had been to engage Syria in diplomatic negotiations, with the US hoping to end Syria's nuclear ambitions via words rather than action. That wasn't enough for Olmert. He reportedly told Bush that the US president's strategy was very disturbing to me, especially given what it says in the Begin Doctrine. Still, Israel didn't have direct military support from the US itself, meaning it would need to plan what would become Operation Orchard itself. But there was a problem. As Israel was set to start its planning phase, Defense Minister and Labour Party head Amir Peretz was set to be replaced by Ehud Barak, and where Peretz seemed ready to go full steam ahead with Operation Orchard, Barak advised caution. He wanted Israel to carry out the attack later than Olmert, who wanted it to happen as soon as possible. There may have been some political gamesmanship afoot here beyond any military concerns, with the Times of Israel saying that Barak likely hoped to use Operation Orchard being carried out under his tenure as defense minister as a means to gain Israelis' premiership in later elections. Olmert, for his part, seemed to want to use the operation to regain the respect he'd lost after Israel's blunders in the 2006 Lebanon war. Olmert came out on top. On September 5, 2007, Israel's Security Cabinet approved Olmert's plan to conduct an immediate attack while pushing the Prime Minister to work alongside Barak to hash out the details. Despite their differences of opinion, the two got to work. In truth, preparations were already underway before approval was granted. Many of the pilots who took part in the raid didn't even know their intended target until minutes before they took off, though they'd spent the last several weeks training the dive bombing techniques they would later use. "They didn't know the target, they didn't understand why," said Israeli Air Force Chief Major General Amikam Norkin in 2018. "In every squadron, there was only one pilot who was the contact person. The other teams were only informed of the target just a few hours before the operation." There was also another problem to confront before the strike could happen: Syria's anti-air defenses. Again, Israel had been working hard on these defenses for several weeks before Operation Orchard officially got underway. Cyber law says that Mossad had prepared a cyber aspect of the operation targeting the radar system networks behind these aerial defenses. Before the kinetic attack against the facility took place, these cyber operatives would essentially blind Syria's defenses, preventing them from firing back at the incoming and dive-bombing planes. Don't underestimate the importance of these cyber assaults on Syria's defenses. Without them, Syria may have been able to shoot Israel's planes out of the sky before they ever managed to complete their bombing runs. The Aviationist reports that Syria was equipped with several Russian-made air defense systems, including the Pantsir S-1, that's believed to be immune to electronic jamming. Mossad identified 29 of these defense systems, with its electronic warfare approach possibly seeing the introduction of Israel's Suta airborne network system to scramble the radar systems. In other words, some of the planes that flew that fateful night were there solely to trick Syria's aerial defenses into thinking that all was well. With the cyber aspect in hand, all that was left was to conduct the strike. That aerial attack would be a challenge. According to Israel's former chief of staff of the IDF, Gadi Eisenkot, the Israeli military made no visible preparations for Operation Orchard ahead of time, focusing solely on clandestine work and the electronic warfare systems the plane would use to bypass Syrian air defenses. The IDF ended up sacrificing preparedness for surprise, but there was a good reason for that. Any hint of an incoming strike would have led to Syria shoring up its defenses and sounding the alarm geopolitically, putting more eyes on Israel in the process. That's why Israel had only told a handful of pilots what the operation's true target would be, but by September 5, 2007 it was ready. The IDF gathered airmen from 3 of its aerial squadrons. Those pulled from Squadrons 119 and 253 flew F-16Es, with those from Squadron 69 flying F-15Es. All were gathered at a briefing where the true nature of Operation Orchard was revealed to them. Due to notes revealed from that meeting, it's clear that the pilots understood the gravity of their work. The Squadron 119 commander even wrote that he believed the operation will change the face of the Middle East. He will be right. The pilots received their official orders during the briefing, along with a message from former Israeli Air Force head Eliezer Shkedi that Operation Orchard was of the utmost importance to the state of Israel and the Jewish people. The pilots were told that their mission was to destroy the Rubik's Cube facility without losing a plane, and while flying with a low signature as much as possible. That instruction added an extra wrinkle to the operation. Israel didn't want anybody to have proof that it had carried out the strike, at least not initially, as plausible deniability would minimize the prospect of Assad declaring war against Israel for its actions. At 22:30, the Israeli fighter jets began their takeoff procedures. Among them were 10 of the F-15Es, each armed with laser-guided bombs that would be dropped on the Rubik's Cube. The F-16I fighter jets would play a supporting role, escorting the F-15Is to their target and confronting any incoming missiles or similar threats along the way. The jets were also joined by a handful of ELINT aircraft, which carried the electronic warfare platforms the IDF intended to use to jam Syria's aerial defense systems' radar networks by feeding those systems with false images of empty skies as the Israeli planes flew over. After takeoff, the aircraft flew north, passing over Turkish airspace. Turkey didn't know about the plan, and after the operation was over, Olmert was forced to apologize to former Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip due to both Israel's planes flying through the country's airspace and for the discarding of fuel tanks by the aircraft, which were dropped for weight reasons. Still, the planes made it through Turkey and entered Syrian airspace. Somewhere along the way, the IDF called 3 of its 10 F-15Is back to base, leaving just 7 to conduct the bombing run. Back in Israel, Olmert, Barak, and several other Israeli officials took their places in a special command center dubbed The Pit. Located deep underground in Tel Aviv, The Pit gave Israel's military a place from which to monitor the operation. At around midnight, the Israeli F-15Is reached the Rubik's Cube and dropped around 17 tons of explosives onto the site. Video footage of the strike, released over a decade after it occurred, shows several bombs hitting the largest rectangular building, believed to be home to Syria's nuclear reactor, within the Rubik's Cube. In seconds, that building was turned into a fireball, collapsing into rubble minutes later. Israel didn't stop there. A second pass of the building saw more bombs being dropped into the rubble, absolutely annihilating the site and killing all who may have been inside. At 1 a.m. on September 6th, the F-15I pilots transmitted a code word back to the pit, Arizona. That code word was the indicator that Israel's strike had been successful. The planes quickly made their way back to Israeli airspace, and the Rubik's Cube, or at least its most important building, was left little more than a burnt-out crater in the Syrian desert. The attack hadn't gone completely unnoticed. A Der Spiegel report published a couple of years after Operation Orchard reports that some who live in the villages surrounding the former Rubik's Cube still speak in hushed tones about what they saw in the early hours of September 6, 2007. A few speak of a bright flash that lit up the night sky. Others speak of a massive plume of smoke, almost looking like a giant finger, that rose over the banks of the Euphrates River. None saw what had really happened, and Syria's state-led news agencies weren't about to tell them. But before and after photos of the Rubik's Cube site tell the story. Where there was once a rectangular building with what appeared to be a solid roof was just a crater in the ground, rubble and a shattered building signifying the end of Syria's nuclear ambitions. Syria's response to the strike was interesting. The country's Sana news outlet initially tried to downplay the incident. It claimed that its air defense units confronted Israeli fighter jets, forcing them to leave after they drop some ammunition in deserted areas without causing any human or material damage. A weak attempt to explain the light flash and the smoke plumes the nearby villagers have reported, perhaps. A diplomatic cable published on WikiLeaks also suggests that Syria placed several long-range missiles containing chemical warheads on alert in the strike's immediate aftermath, though it chose not to deploy them. Around a year after Operation Orchard, Assad had to admit that the strike had been successful, though he rubbished claims that the attack was on a nuclear reactor. He claimed Israel had just hit a military facility in the desert. "Is it logical?" he asked a year after the attack. "A nuclear site did not have protection with surface-to-air missiles. A nuclear site within the footprint of satellites in the middle of Syria in an open area in the desert." Seemingly reasonable questions, though the evidence Mossad had gathered beforehand proved that the Rubik's Cube was a nuclear site, with the reason for lack of defenses being a combination of the IDF's electronic warfare and Syria not wanting to draw attention to the site. Still, outside of a letter sent to former Secretary General of the United Nations Ban Ki-moon bemoaning Israel's breach of Syrian airspace, Assad and his cronies didn't muster much of a response. As for Israel, it spent the next decade staying tight-lipped about the whole affair. Outside of a message sent to Syria via Turkey that it wouldn't tolerate any Syrian attempts to build a nuclear reactor, Israel didn't claim responsibility for Operation Orchard for many years. It wasn't until 2018 that Israel finally came clean after spending the previous 10 years doing little more than giving a metaphorical wink and a smile whenever the attack was brought up. As for why it chose 2018 to claim responsibility, the Times of Israel says that the timing of the reveal may have been used to send an indirect threat to Iran. "You saw what we did to Syria when it tried to build nuclear weapons. We can do the same to you." There's one last postscript to add to this story. Assad wasn't the only man in Syria who wanted to go nuclear. Haaretz said that he'd shared his ambitions with a small group of his advisors, including Brigadier General Mohammed Suleiman, who headed the nuclear project at the Rubik's Cube. Suleiman wasn't caught up in Operation Orchard, but to make sure he wouldn't be an ongoing threat, Israeli Navy snipers eliminated him around 6 months after the operation, as he dined in his villa in Latakia. And with that, Assad's nuclear ambitions fell by the wayside. And now that Syria's former president has been deposed, Israel will likely be hoping that it will never have to carry out a mission like Operation Orchard in the country again. Only time will tell if that hope becomes a reality. But what do you think about Operation Orchard? Was Israel justified in its strike against the Rubik's Cube site? Or do you believe Assad's claim that the site was merely a standard military facility? Share your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for watching the video. Now go and check out This Shows How Weak Russia Has Become, the Syrian Collapse, or click this other video instead.